August 29, 1944, dawn broke across the flat Norman countryside near the town of Chartres, 60 miles southwest of Paris. The air hung thick with dust and diesel fumes. German Oberst Friedrich von Gersdorff, Chief of Staff of the 7th Army, stood at the edge of a shattered crossroads, his field glasses trained on the horizon. He had been a soldier for 24 years. He had seen the mechanized columns of the Wehrmacht sweep across Poland in weeks, crush France in 40 days, and drive deep into the Soviet heartland. He understood logistics, he understood supply chains, he understood the mathematics of modern war. What he saw that morning defied understanding. From his vantage point, the American convoy stretched beyond sight, a river of olive-drab metal flowing westward without end. Trucks, jeeps, half-tracks, fuel tankers, ambulances, mobile workshops, all moving in unbroken procession. Every 2 seconds, another vehicle. Von Gersdorff counted silently at first, then stopped. The numbers became meaningless. His adjutant stood beside him, equally silent. They had been watching for 20 minutes. The column had not paused. This was not supposed to be possible. For 3 years, the German High Command had built its strategy on a single assumption, that Allied logistics would collapse under their own weight. The Wehrmacht's war colleges taught a doctrine refined through centuries of European conflict. Supply lines stretched and snapped. Armies outran their fuel and food. Advances stalled when the rear guard could not keep pace with the vanguard. It was mathematical certainty. It was the reason Napoleon failed in Russia. It was the reason the Schlieffen Plan fell apart in 1914. Distance devoured armies. The German commanders in France expected history to repeat itself. When the Allies broke out of Normandy in late July 1944, Wehrmacht strategists calculated that the American Third Army under Patton could sustain its offensive for perhaps 2 weeks before grinding to a halt, starved of gasoline and ammunition. The roads from the invasion beaches to the front were nearly 300 miles long by August, clogged with rubble, cratered by bombs, choked at river crossings. The Germans themselves had destroyed most of the French rail network during their retreat. Every staff officer with the Wehrmacht knew the formula. One armored division consumed 300 tons of supplies daily. An army of 12 divisions needed 3,600 tons per day across 300 miles of devastated countryside. It could not be sustained. The mathematics forbade it, but the convoys kept coming. General Major Rudolf von Gersdorff, cousin of Friedrich and commander of a panzer brigade, recorded his observations in a field report dated September 3, 1944. His unit had been ordered to hold a position near the Meuse River to delay the American advance while German forces regrouped. He positioned his Panthers in a tree line overlooking the Main supply route, expecting to ambush scattered logistics units, vulnerable trucks separated from their escorts. "We anticipated chaos," he wrote. "We expected to find supply columns strung out, exhausted, low on fuel themselves. We expected confusion." Instead, his forward observers reported convoys moving in perfect synchronization. Every vehicle maintained interval, every truck carried full loads. Fuel tankers moved in clusters, escorted by anti-aircraft half-tracks. Mobile repair teams traveled integrated into the columns, pulling disabled vehicles off the road within minutes. The Americans had even positioned military police at every intersection, directing traffic like conductors of an orchestra. At night, the convoys switched on headlights in a combat zone, and continued moving. Von Gersdorff's Tigers opened fire once, destroying 11 trucks in a single ambush. Within an hour, he noted with something approaching disbelief, the wreckage had been cleared and the flow resumed as if nothing had occurred. The Germans had prepared for war against an enemy. They found themselves facing an economic system. Across the crumbling German defensive line that late summer, the same reports filtered back to headquarters. Major Hans von Luck, commanding a reconnaissance battalion, watched American supply dumps materialize overnight. vast square-mile expansions of stacked crates, pyramids of jerry cans, mountains of ammunition. "We thought perhaps they were decoys," he recalled in his post-war memoir. "Elaborate deceptions meant to draw our bombers. We sent scouts. Everything was real." At a captured fuel depot near Orléans, German engineers discovered records indicating that the Americans were transporting 12,000 tons of supplies daily across France. 12,000 tons. The figure seemed a clerical error. An entire German army group consumed 8,000 tons per day at the peak of operations. The Americans were moving more logistics to supply one army, Patton's Third, than Germany allocated to an entire theatre. The cognitive dissonance fractured something fundamental in German strategic thinking. For years, they had been told that the democracies were weak, soft, incapable of matching the efficiency and discipline of the totalitarian state. The Americans especially, a mongrel nation of individualists obsessed with comfort and profit, lacking the ideological purity and martial spirit required for modern industrial war. This was the core mythology of the regime, that will and ideology could overcome material disadvantage, that German organizational genius could outthink and outmaneuver wealthier but spiritually inferior opponents. The convoys demolished that myth with silent, relentless mathematical certainty. Oberst Hans von Klug, son of the field marshal, commanded a defensive sector near Troy. In an August 31st briefing to his subordinates, he attempted to explain what they faced. "The Americans do not operate like an army," he said, his words recorded by a staff lieutenant. "They operate like a factory. Every morning supplies arrive as if from an assembly line. Their soldiers eat fresh bread. Their wounded are evacuated in hours, not days. They waste ammunition because they have so much that conservation is unnecessary. They replace tanks faster than we can destroy them." He paused, struggling with the implications. "We are not fighting a military force. We are fighting an economy, and you cannot kill an economy with bullets." The symbolic weight of that realization manifested in the simplest objects. German soldiers subsisting on black bread and ersatz coffee began finding American ration crates in abandoned positions. Each crate contained delicacies unimaginable to Wehrmacht troops in their fourth year of war: canned fruit, chocolate, cigarettes, coffee, real coffee, chewing gum, and meat that did not come from a horse. The K-rations alone contained more calories than a German soldier's daily allocation. American truck drivers casually discarded half-empty cans of Spam. Their medics had penicillin, still experimental and rare in German hospitals. Their front-line troops had winter coats in storage before autumn arrived. One particular object haunted German reports that fall: the jerry can. Originally a German invention, the Wehrmacht's fuel containers had been copied and mass-produced by the Americans in quantities that staggered the imagination. German reconnaissance teams reported finding jerry cans used as makeshift seats, latrines, improvised shelters, treated as disposable items because American industry could produce millions more. The container designed to give the Wehrmacht a logistical edge had been turned into a symbol of American material excess. General Gerd von Rundstedt, reinstated as commander of German forces in the West, met with his staff in early September to assess the strategic situation. The transcript of that conference, preserved in Allied archives, captures the despair beneath professional military language. One officer suggested concentrating armor for a major counteroffensive, bleeding the American advance until their logistics collapsed. Von Rundstedt, 70 years old and exhausted, shook his head. "They will not collapse," he said quietly. "I have read the intelligence reports. The Americans are building a pipeline from the coast to the front, an actual pipeline, hundreds of kilometers long, to carry fuel inland. They are laying railroad tracks at night while their armies advance during the day. They have more trucks in France than our entire military possessed at the start of the war. Another officer protested. Surely there are limits. No nation can sustain. There are no limits. Von Rundstedt interrupted. Not limits as we understand them. We are fighting the United States of America. They have not even fully mobilized their economy. This, he gestured at the maps showing American supply lines. Aye, this is what they accomplish while still producing consumer goods for civilians, while their people at home eat meat daily and purchase automobiles. The room fell silent. The psychological transformation rippled through the German command structure that autumn. Officers who had spent careers studying Frederick the Great and Clausewitz found their doctrines irrelevant against an opponent who could simply outproduce any tactical brilliance. The carefully cultivated professional pride of the Wehrmacht staff, men who had orchestrated blitzkrieg campaigns across a continent, curdled into exhausted fatalism. Major Joachim von Ribbentrop, distant relative of the foreign minister and a logistics officer himself, wrote in a September diary entry that would later surface at Nuremberg. We planned for a war of movement and maneuver. They planned for a war of production and delivery. We thought logistics was about efficiency. They showed us that logistics is about capacity. We cannot win, not because they fight better, though they fight well enough, but because behind every American soldier stands the gross national product of an entire continent, mobilized and organized on a scale we never imagined possible. By October 1944, as American forces reached the German border, Wehrmacht commanders stopped planning counteroffensives based on enemy logistics failures. The Red Ball Express, the famous truck convoy system that supplied the Allied advance, became a kind of ghost story in German headquarters, spoken of with the same weary resignation that medieval soldiers might have discussed siege engines or gunpowder. It was simply an insurmountable material fact like weather or terrain. Oberst von Gersdorf survived the war. In interviews during the 1950s, he returned repeatedly to that morning near Chartres, watching the endless convoy flow past. We knew then, he said, that we had lost, not lost that battle or that campaign, lost the war, lost the foundational assumption of our strategy. We believed that German will and German organization could overcome material disadvantage. The Americans proved that sufficient material advantage makes will and organization irrelevant. They buried us in trucks. The convoys continued rolling east through the autumn and into winter, carrying the weight of factory floors from Detroit and Pittsburgh, the output of farms across Iowa and Kansas, the accumulated productive capacity of a nation that had turned its industrial might toward a single purpose. The trucks became, in a sense, the most devastating weapon system of the Western Front, not because they destroyed, but because they sustained destruction indefinitely, without pause, without exhaustion. In the end, the German commanders learned what Napoleon and every pre-industrial general had never fully grasped, that modern war is not won by courage or tactics or operational brilliance, though all matter. Modern war is won by logistics, and logistics at sufficient scale becomes indistinguishable from national character, a reflection not of military doctrine, but of economic philosophy, of systems built over generations to move goods from producers to consumers, systems that could be converted with terrifying efficiency into moving ammunition from factories to front lines. The Americans did not defeat the Wehrmacht through superior strategy. They defeated it the way a river defeats a stone, not through force at any single moment, but through the patient, inexorable application of overwhelming volume, the mathematics of abundance grinding down the arithmetic of scarcity until nothing remained but the tired realization that some wars are decided long before the first shot, decided in the factories and farms and freight systems of nations at peace, decided by societies organized around surplus rather than sacrifice. The convoy stretched beyond sight that August morning, and in its endless procession the future became visible, a world where the nation that could produce the most, transport the most, waste the most, would inherit the earth.